All right. Good evening, everybody. Today is Friday, June 27th, here in the Bronx, here in the world. I am happy to be joining all of you again for another weekly Poe class series. I wasn't here last week. Robert and Kynan did an excellent job filling in for me while I was sick. And you'll notice that there is more light on my face than usual. Today we have some lighting. So we are doing something a little bit different than we normally do. Now, as always, if this is your first time here, this is something we do every Friday where we read a story by Edgar Poe. But of course, before we do that, I give you a little bit of an update and a briefing. Now, recently, I've been told by one of the volunteers on our campaign that they tend to tune in for this section of the Poe reading just for the update on what's going on in the week, what we are in the campaign, and then they tune out of the Poe story. I would strongly advise that you stick around for the story here, especially because of the wake of everything happening around the world, everything happening here in the country and New York and so on. There is a lot of optimism, there's a lot of excitement, but there's also has to be a dose of reality. We may have small wins here or there. People may be optimistic about certain directions in which the world is going, or in certain places in the country where things are going. But the threat of nuclear war is still a very real one. And that was, of course, the subject of today's International Peace Coalition talk. And I think the best way to summarize what happened is actually by starting at the end. Because ultimately, what Helga Zepp-LaRouche went through at the end of the International Peace Coalition call was that it is the vocation of every man to love every man. And that we should strive for the best of humanity and seek redemption for those that even are so depraved and evil that even they, the soldiers of these people, may even find some kind of redemption. That was a very tough and challenging thing for her to say. And she referenced her 10 principles, specifically the last principle, the 10th principle, which I will now put up here on the screen for everybody to see. She said here, she referenced her 10th principle. The basic assumption for the new paradigm is that man is fundamentally good and capable to infinitely perfect the creativity of his mind and the beauty of his soul. And being the most advanced geological force in the universe, which proves that the lawfulness of the mind and that of the physical universe are in correspondence and cohesion, and that all evil is the result of a lack of development and therefore can be overcome. A new world economic order is emerging, involving the vast majorities of the countries of the global south. The European nations and the United States must not fight this effort, but by joining hands with the developing countries, cooperate to shape the next epoch of the development of the human species to become a renaissance of the highest and most noble expressions of creativity. Let us therefore create an international movement of world citizens who work together to shape the next phase in the evolution of mankind, the new epoch. World citizens of all countries unite. And I thought that that was a perfect way to summarize and characterize what the direction of what we're actually supposed to be mobilizing around is. So we put out a leaflet, or at least the LaRouche organization put out a leaflet this week titled, "Will there be thermonuclear fireworks by the 4th of July?" Now, this was, of course, I remember I was witnessing the process of this leaflet being written. It started being composed just before the United States struck the Iranian nuclear sites like Fordo and others. And then, of course, it was modified just a little bit after we did the strikes. And we have a mobilization effort right now to get this leaflet out to as many people as possible in the New York City and also around the country. Now, I said New York City because obviously I'm based here in New York City and we have a big distribution of this tomorrow. But let me emphasize something. This leaflet has been translated into German, into French, into Italian, and into Spanish. And one of the reports that we got today and the International Peace Coalition, of course, was we got them from Mexico, and we got it from our friend Kynan, who you saw last week, who is actually in France right now and organizing over there. And he gave an excellent report of the kinds of interactions and people that he's been meeting out in the streets over in France. And Carolina of Mexico gave an excellent report as well of what she's been experiencing over in in Mexico and getting this leaflet out and organizing around Lynn's ideas on this, and what we're supposed to be doing on getting this out. And also on the International Peace Coalition call, too, we had Dennis Kucinich, former congressman and also former presidential candidate, joined us on the International Peace Coalition call today. And it's always good to have an elder statesman on, somebody who has an idea of what the direction the country should be going in. One of the strongest criticisms he had, of course, was Donald Trump's remarks comparing the strike on Iran to what happened at Hiroshima. Of course, it's very disgusting to say that what the United States did on Iran is comparable to what we did to Hiroshima. And as Dennis Kucinich pointed out, this shows that the president has no idea what actually happened at Hiroshima, what its implications are, and what it actually meant for that to happen. And of course, the congressman issued, some really harsh and stern warnings and criticisms. And that was, of course, followed by Graham Fuller as well, who gave his analysis on where the world stands right now after this Iran nuclear strike. And the conclusion that came off of it is, of course, this peace deal, this ceasefire deal means absolutely nothing. The world is not a step closer to peace. And the conditions for war to erupt continue to exist and are probably more fragile now than they were before this. Some people may have seen this statement that Donald Trump put out, talking about how he is not going to lift some of the sanctions on Iran because of the ungratefulness of the Ayatollah. But regardless, that is where the world stands. But as we emphasize every week, we're not spectators in this. We are actors in this. Okay. And yes, can we relish sometimes when there seems to be some victory in an establishment way? Maybe so. But let's think beyond electoral politics for just a second. And I know that may be ironic given that I'm a congressional candidate and I ask all of you to come out and support and donate and do what you can. But we're building a movement here. We have a year and a half to go till the next election. What is going to happen between now and then, now and the end of the year, now and the end of the month, which is only in 4 days, will be decided by what we decide to do right now, irrespective of elections. So if you're optimistic right now and you're happy, channel that into action. Now it's needed more than ever, and join our campaign, and you can donate and support us at votevega.nyc. So with that being said, we are now going to dive into the Poe story. We still don't have Dennis Speed, who'll be joining us. Hopefully he'll be back next week. He has been out sick, and we hope for a speedy recovery for him. But we are now going to dive into the story. And one of the things that I want to do is I'm going to bring up my friend Robert Castle, who's usually here in person. He's joining us virtually today, to tell us some of these references that Poe talks about in the beginning of the story. So hopefully, Robert, you are not muted, and hopefully, let's see if this works. So let's see. Here we go. Robert, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So if you just pull up the links, we can just go through these one by one.
Got it. I'll do it in order. I'll start with the passage of Berezina. Okay.
So this is a historical reference to Napoleon's retreat from Russia. There were massive casualties. This is sort of a somewhat well-known event, but maybe not nominally. So there were tens of thousands of deaths, and it was, massive suffering, people dying in the open exposure. You can go to the next one. So the 1755 earthquake in Lisbon, again, tens of thousands of people died. It was, you had the Portuguese had a massive empire at the time, and there was a lot of speculation about, theodicy, about punishment for crimes. But again, tens of thousands of people died. The earthquake damaged the buildings in the city. There are still ruins that stand in Lisbon of giant cathedrals that had fallen in this earthquake. after the massive damage on the ground, then it was followed by a series of tsunamis, which came and crashed into the city. And since, at least according to the account that I read, I'm not sure if it's really accurate. It might be a slightly romantic picture, but because it was on a holiday for St. Bartholomew, there were candles lit, and supposedly the chaos that ensued caused a lot of these candles to also cause fires. So this was a massive calamity, which I know that the woodcut is a little bit pixelated, but you kind of get the image. This was a contemporaneous woodcut showing the simultaneous fires, tsunami, and damage from the earthquake. You can go to the next one.
Sure, I will. And just to make it clear to people, all of these references, or most of these references, are in the first paragraph of the story.
No,
So
yeah,
we don't want, yeah.
yeah,
Go on.
these are the references that Poe uses. So what you once we get into the story, you'll see kind of his point in referencing all of these sequentially. I think people know generally about um, the outbreak of the bubonic plague in England. Um, it decimated London's population in the span of about a year. Um, so yeah, that's a more famous one. We can go to the next one. This is the massacre of Saint Bartholomew. This was something that's probably less known. It was a sort of intrigue between um, Catholic forces and Huguenot forces um, in France. There was the story behind this is that there was a um, I don't know all the background on it, but there was an assassination attempt against a Huguenot leader, and then 2 days later there was this massive there were a series of assassinations, and then open warfare sort of in the streets. If you you can look at the detail in this painting. It's actually it's a very good painting. Um, but um, but yeah, so this was a sort of um, insurrection, religious war that occurred in 1572. I think that's it, or is there one more? Yeah, there's one more. This one is a reference to a prison that was designed in Calcutta. I guess that around I'm not sure the exact date, 1750 something, but the all of the prisoners in this dungeon were the majority of them were British, and this occurred during the liberation of Calcutta from the East India Company, or an attempted liberation. Again, I don't know all of the details, but the point here is the poetic image of about 150 people all trapped in a dungeon, in a tiny cell, and these were agents of the East India Company, who were at the time colonial uh, rulers of India. So yeah, so there's obviously a lot here, and I don't think Poe's point is to get into the details of each historical event, um, so much as to give us various examples of human calamity, either human made or resulting from natural disasters. So yeah, that I think that's enough to kind of to put the image in our mind of what Poe is really contemplating with this story.
All right. Thank you, Robert. So I think we can just get started with the story now. So what I'll do is I will pull up the story, and I will I will begin, and then we're going to cycle through the people in the room to read it. And then I have some friends of mine who are joining us online. Um, I just ask that, if you're still with us, thank you for sticking around this long, and let's just get started. All right. So, by the way, the version that I'm using for the premature burial, for those of you who are joining us online, I put it in the private chat, and actually, I will probably do that again, just so that in case you don't like following along with the shared screen, you can do so through the link that I put in the chat. And the version that I'm using is text 02B. This is as close to the original, to the manuscript as possible. And this was published in the Philadelphia Dollar newspaper. The Premature Burial by Edgar Poe Esquire, author of the popular prize story The Gold Bug and etc. There are certain themes of which the interest is all absorbing, but which are too entirely horrible for the purposes of legitimate fiction. These the mere romanticist must eschew if he do not wish to offend or to disgust. They are with proprietary handled only when the severity and majesty of truth sanctify and sustain them. We thrill, for example, with the most intense of pleasurable pain over the accounts of the passage of the Beresina, of the earthquake at Lisbon, of the plague at London, of the massacre of St. Bartholomew, or of the stifling of the 123 prisoners in the black hole of Calcutta. But in these accounts, it is the fact, it is the reality, it is the history which excites. As inventions, we should regard them with simple abhorrence. I have mentioned some few of the more prominent and august calamities upon record, but in these it is the extent, not less than the character of the calamity, which so vividly impresses the fancy. I need not remind the reader that from the long and weird catalogue of human miseries, I might have selected many individual instances more replete with essential suffering than any of those vast generalities of disaster. The true wretchedness, indeed, the ultimate woe, is particular, not diffuse, that the ghastly extremes of agony are endured by man the unit, and never by man the mass. For this, let us thank a merciful God. To be buried while alive is, beyond question, the most terrific of these extremes which has ever fallen to the lot of mere mortality. That it has frequently, very frequently, so fallen, will scarcely be denied by those who think. The boundaries which divide life from death are at best shadowy and vague. Who shall say where the one ends and where the other begins? We know that there are diseases in which occur total cessations of all of the apparent functions of vitality, and yet in which these cessations are merely suspensions, properly so called. They are only temporary pauses in the incomprehensible mechanism. A certain period elapses, and some unseen mysterious principle again sets in motion the magic pinions and the wizard wheels. The silver cord was not forever loosed, and nor the golden bowl irreparably broken. But where, meantime, was the soul? All right, so I'll pass it off. Since we have so many readers tonight, which is great, I will. Let's go next. You want to try? You want Go for it, Suzanne. Yep, you can start reading from there.
Apart, however, from the inevitable conclusion, a priori, that such causes must produce such effects, that the well-known occurrence of such cases of suspended animation must naturally give rise now and then to premature interments. Apart from this consideration, we have the direct testimony of medical and ordinary experience to prove that a vast number of such interments have actually taken place. I might refer at once, if necessary, to 100 well-authenticated instances. One, a very remarkable character, than of which the circumstances may be fresh in the memory of some of my readers, occurred not very long ago in the neighboring city of Baltimore, where it occasioned painful, intense, and widely extended excitement. The wife of one of the most respectable citizens, a lawyer of eminence and a member of Congress, was seized with a sudden and unaccountable illness which completely baffled the skill of her physicians. After much suffering, she died, or was supposed to die. No one suspected, indeed, or had reason to suspect, that she was not actually dead. She presented all the ordinary appearances of death. The face assumed the usual pinched and sunken outline. The lips were of the usual marble pallor. The eyes were lustreless. There was no warmth. Pulsation had ceased. For 3 days, the body was preserved unburied, during which it had acquired a stony rigidity. The funeral, in short, was hastened on account of the rapid advance of what was supposed to be decomposition. The lady was deposited in her family vault, which for 3 subsequent years was undisturbed. At the expiration of this term, it was opened for the reception of a sarcophagus. But alas, how fearful a shock awaited the husband, who personally threw open the door. As its portal swung outwardly back, some white appareled object fell rattling within his arms. It was the skeleton of his wife in her yet unmolded shroud. A careful investigation rendered it evident that she had revived within 2 days after her entombment, that her struggles within the coffin had caused it to fall from a ledge or shelf to the floor, where it was so broken as to permit her escape. A lamp, which had been accidentally left full of oil within the tomb, was found empty. It might have been exhausted, however, by evaporation. On the uppermost of the steps which led down into the dread chamber was a large fragment of the coffin, with which it seemed that she had endeavored to arrest attention by striking the iron door. While thus occupied, she probably swooned or possibly died through sheer terror. And in falling, her shroud became entangled in some ironwork which projected interiorly. Thus she remained, and thus the rotted erect.
All right, let's go to Robert actually next. So you can.
In the year 1810, a case of living inhumation happened in France, attended with circumstances which go far to warrant the assertion that truth is indeed stranger than fiction. The heroine of the story was a Mademoiselle Victorine Lafourcade, a young girl of illustrious family, of wealth, and of great personal beauty. Among her numerous suitors was Julien Bossuet, a poor litterateur or journalist of Paris. His talents and general amiability had recommended him to the notice of the heiress, by whom he seems to have been truly beloved. But her pride of birth decided her, finally, to reject him, and to wed a Monsieur Raynel, a banker and a diplomatist of some eminence. After marriage, however, this gentleman neglected, and perhaps even more positively ill-treated her. Having passed with him some wretched years, she died. At least her condition so closely resembled death as to deceive every one who saw her. She was buried, not in a vault, but in an ordinary grave in the village of her nativity. Filled with despair, and still inflamed by the memory of a profound attachment, the lover journeys from the capital to the remote province in which the village lies, with the romantic purpose of disinterring the corpse and possessing himself of its luxuriant tresses. He reaches the grave. At midnight he unearths the coffin, opens it, and is in the act of detaching the hair when he is arrested by the unclosing of the beloved eyes. In fact, the lady had been buried alive. Vitality had not altogether departed, and she was aroused by the caresses of her lover from the lethargy which had been mistaken for death. He bore her frantically to his lodgings in the village. He employed certain powerful restoratives suggested by no little medical learning. In fine, she revived. She recognized her preserver. She remained with him until, by slow degrees, she fully recovered her original health. Her woman's heart was not adamant, and this last lesson of love sufficed to soften it. She bestowed it upon Bossuet. She returned no more to her husband, but concealing from him her resurrection, fled with her lover to America. 20 years afterward, the two returned to France, in the persuasion that time had so greatly altered the lady's appearance that her friends would be unable to recognize her. They were mistaken, however, for at the first meeting, Monsieur Raynal did actually recognize and make claim to his wife. This claim she resisted, and a judicial tribunal sustained her in her resistance, deciding that the peculiar circumstances, with the long lapse of years, had extinguished, not only equitably, but legally, the authority of the husband. The Chirurgical Journal of Leipzig, a periodical of high authority and merit, which some American bookseller would do well to translate and republish, records in a late number a very distressing event of the character in question. An officer of artillery, a man of gigantic stature and of robust health, being thrown from an unmanageable horse, received a very severe contusion upon the head, which rendered him insensible at once. The skull was slightly fractured, but no immediate danger was apprehended. Trepanning was accomplished successfully. I think that means boring a hole in his skull to release the pressure of the blood.
Oh, okay, thank you.
He was bled, and many other of the ordinary means of relief were adopted. Gradually, however, he fell into a more and more hopeless state of stupor, and finally it was thought that he died. The weather was warm, and he was buried with indecent haste in one of the public cemeteries. His funeral took place on Thursday. On the Sunday following, the grounds of the cemetery were, as usual, much thronged with visitors, and about noon, an intense excitement was created by the declaration of a peasant that, while sitting upon the grave of the officer, he had distinctly felt a commotion of the earth, as if occasioned by some one struggling underneath. At first little attention was paid to the man's asseveration, but his evident terror and the dogged obstinacy with which he persisted in his story had, at length, their natural effect upon the crowd. Spades were hurriedly procured, and the grave, which was shamefully shallow, was, in a few minutes, so far thrown open that the head of its occupant appeared. He was then, seemingly, dead, but he sat nearly erect within his coffin, the lid of which, in his furious struggles, he had partially uplifted. He was forthwith conveyed to the nearest hospital, and there pronounced to be still living, although in an asphytic condition. After some hours he revived, recognized individuals of his acquaintance, and, in broken sentences, spoke of his agonies in the grave. From what he related, it was clear that he must have been conscious of life for more than an hour while inhumed, before lapsing into insensibility. The grave was carelessly and loosely filled with an exceedingly porous soil, and thus some air was necessarily admitted. He heard the footsteps of the crowd overhead, and endeavored to make himself heard in turn. It was the tumult within the grounds of the cemetery, he said, which appeared to awaken him from a deep sleep. But no sooner was he awake than he became fully aware of the awful horrors of his position. This patient, it is recorded, was doing well, and seemed to be in a fair way of ultimate recovery, but fell a victim to the quackeries of medical experiment. The galvanic battery was applied, and he suddenly expired in one of those ecstatic paroxysms which occasionally it superinduces.
All right. Do you want to try? Okay. All right.
The mention of the galvanic battery nevertheless recalls to my memory a well-known and very extraordinary case in point where its action proved the means of restoring to animation a young attorney of London who had been interred for 2 days. This occurred in 1821 and created at the time a very profound sensation wherever it was made the subject of converse. The patient, Mr. Edward Stapleton, had died apparently of typhus fever, accompanied with some anomalous symptoms, which had excited the curiosity of his medical attendants. Upon his seeming decease, his friends were requested to sanction a post-mortem examination, but declined to permit it. As often happens when such refusals are made, the practitioners resolved to disinter the body and dissect it at leisure in private. Arrangements were easily effected with some of the numerous corpses of body snatchers with which London abounds, and upon the third night after the funeral, the supposed corpse was unearthed from a grave 8 feet deep and deposited in the operating chamber of one of the private hospitals. An incision of some extent had been actually made in the abdomen when the fresh and undecayed appearance of the subject suggested an application of the battery. One experiment succeeded another, and the customary effects supervened with nothing to characterize them in any respect, except upon 1 or 2 occasions, a more than ordinary degree of lifelikness in the convulsive action. It grew late. The day was about to dawn, and it was thought expedient at length to proceed at once to the dissection. A student, however, was especially desirous of testing a theory of his own, and insisted upon applying the battery to one of the pectoral muscles. A rough gash was made and a wire hastily brought in contact. When the patient, with a hurried but quite unconvulsive movement, arose from the table, stepped into the middle of the floor, gazed about him uneasily for a few seconds, and then spoke. What he said was unintelligible, but words were uttered. The symbolification was distinct. Having spoken, he fell heavily to the floor.
Hold on. Syllabification. Robert, I'm going to bring you back in. Do you have any idea what that means? I'm going to assume something about the way words were formed, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's just a way of saying, pronunciation of syllables.
Okay.
I think he's saying that he was speaking, but there wasn't a clear meaning because he was just pronouncing syllables, maybe not words. Or,
Awesome.
he does say words were uttered, but yeah, syllabification.
Thank you, Robert. Okay. All right. You can continue.
Okay. For some moments, all were paralyzed with awe, but the urgency of the case soon restored them their presence of mind. It was seen that Mr. Stapleton was alive, although in a swoon. Upon exhibition of ether, he revived and was rapidly restored to health and to the society of his friends, from whom, however, all knowledge of his resuscitation was withheld, until a relapse was no longer to be apprehended. Their wonder, their rapturous astonishment may be conceived. The most thrilling peculiarity of this incident, nevertheless, is involved in what Mr. S. himself asserts. He declares that at no period was he altogether insensible, that dully and confusedly he was aware of everything which happened to him, from the moment in which he was pronounced dead by his physicians to that in which he fell swooning to the floor of the hospital. "I'm alive" were the uncomprehended words which, upon recognizing the locality of the dissecting room, he had endeavored in his extremity to utter.
All right. Let's go to. That was good. Thank you. All right. Sam, you're up. So you can unmute and then I'll bring you up on the stage.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Yep.
All right. It were an easy matter to multiply such histories as these, but I forbear. For indeed we have no need of such to establish the fact that premature interments occur. When we reflect how very rarely, from the nature of the case, we have it in our power to detect them, we must admit that they may frequently occur without our cognizance. Scarcely, in truth, is a graveyard ever encroached upon, for any purpose, to any great extent, that skeletons are not found in postures which suggest the most fearful of suspicions. Fearful indeed the suspicion, but more fearful the doom. It may be asserted without hesitation that no event is so terribly well adapted to inspire the supremeness of bodily and of mental distress as is burial before death. Unendurable oppression of the lungs, the stifling fumes from the damp earth, the clinging of the death garments, the rigid embrace of the narrow house, the blackness of the absolute night, the silence like a sea that overwhelms, the unseen but palpable presence of the conqueror worm. These things, with thoughts of the air and grass above, with memory of dear friends who would fly to save us if but informed of our fate, and with consciousness of that fate they can never be informed, that our hopeless portion is that of the really dead. These considerations, I say, carry into the heart, which, sorry about that,
Mhm.
carry into the heart, which still palpitates, a degree of appalling and intolerable horror from which the most daring imagination must recoil. We know of nothing so agonizing upon earth. We can dream of nothing half so hideous in the realms of the nethermost hell. And thus all narratives upon this topic have an interest profound, an interest, nevertheless, which through the sacred awe of the topic itself, very properly and very peculiarly depends upon our conviction of the truth of the matter narrated. What I have now to tell is of my own actual knowledge, of my own positive and personal experience. For several years I had been subject to attacks of the singular disorder which physicians have agreed to term catalepsy, in default of a more definitive title. Although both the immediate and the predisposing causes, and even the actual diagnosis of this disease, are still mysteries, its obvious and apparent character is sufficiently well understood. Its variations seem to be chiefly of degree. Sometimes the patient lies for a day only, or even for a shorter period, in a species of exaggerated lethargy. He is senseless and externally motionless, but the pulsation of the heart is still faintly perceptible. Some traces of warmth remain, a slight color lingers within the center of the cheek, and upon application of a mirror to the lips we can detect a torpid, unequal, and vacillating action of the lungs. Then again, the duration of the trance is for weeks, even for months. While the closest scrutiny and the most rigorous medical tests fail to establish any material distinction between the state we conceive of absolute death. Very usually, he is saved from premature interment solely by the knowledge of his friends that he has been previously subject to catalepsy, by the consequent suspicion excited, and, above all, by the non-appearance of decay. The advances of the malady are, luckily, gradual. The first manifestations, although marked, are unequivocal. The fits grow successively more and more distinctive, and endure each for a longer term than the preceding. In this lies the principal security from inhumation. The unfortunate whose first attack should be of the extreme character which is occasionally seen would almost inevitably be consigned alive to the tomb. My own
All right.
case differed in no important particular from those mentioned in medical books. Sometimes, without any apparent cause, I sank, little by little, into a condition of hemisyncope, or half-swoon, and in this condition, without pain, without the ability to stir, or, strictly speaking, to think, but with a dull lethargic consciousness of life and of the presence of those who surrounded my bed, I remained until the crisis of the disease restored me suddenly to perfect sensation. At other times I was quickly and impetuously smitten. I grew sick and numb and chilly and dizzy, and so fell prostrate at once. Then for weeks all was void and black and silent, and nothing became the universe. Total annihilation could be no more. From these latter attacks I awoke, however, with a gradation slow in proportion to the suddenness of the seizure. Just as the day dawns to the friendless and houseless beggar who roams the streets throughout the long, desolate winter night, just so tardily, just so wearily, just so cheerily came back the light of the soul to me.
That was good, Sam. Thank you. All right, now I'm gonna bring up Ashley, who can unmute. I can see when she unmutes, and then I'll bring her up. And then, by the way, then we're gonna enter into a dialogue. It's not a super long dialogue. There's two characters. There's the narrator there, and then there's the person that he's talking to, and then there's the actual narration. When we get to that, I will do the actual narration. Ashley, you can keep being the you can be the voice of the narrator, and either of you want to be the other character? Okay, all right, and then we have our shadow here. Great. All right, perfect. Anyway, oh yeah, I have to bring up Ashley. Okay, go ahead, Ashley.
Apart from the tendency to trance, however, my general health appeared to be good. nor could I perceive that it was at all affected by the one prevalent malady, unless, indeed, an idiosyncrasy in my ordinary sleep may be looked upon as superinduced. Upon awaking from slumber, I could never gain at once thorough possession of my senses, and always remained for many minutes in much bewilderment and perplexity. The mental faculties in general, but the memory in especial, being in a condition of absolute abeyance. In all that I endured, there was no physical suffering, but of moral distress and infinitude. My fancy grew charnel. I talked of worms, of tombs, and epitaphs. I was lost in reveries of death, and the idea of premature burial held continual possession of my brain. The ghastly danger to which I was subjected haunted me day and night. In the former, the torture of meditation was excessive, in the latter, supreme. When the grim darkness overspread the earth, then, with very every horror of thought, I shook like the quivering plumes upon the hearse. When nature could endure wakefulness no longer, it was with a struggle that I consented to sleep, for I shuddered to reflect that, upon awaking, I might find myself the tenant of a grave. And when, finally, I sank into slumber, it was only to rush at once into a world of phantasms, above which was with vast, sable, overshadowing wing hovered predominant the one sepulchral idea. From the innumerable images of gloom which thus oppressed me in dreams, I selected for record but a solitary vision. Methought I was immersed in a cataleptic trance of more than usual duration and profundity. Suddenly there came an icy hand upon my forehead, and an impatient, gibbering voice whispered the word, "Arise," within my ear. I sat erect. The darkness was total. I could not see the figure of him who had aroused me. I could call to mind neither the period at which I had fallen into the trance, nor the locality in which I then lay. While I remained motionless and busied in endeavors to collect my thoughts, the cold hand grasped me fiercely by the wrist, shaking it petulantly, while gibbering voice said again,
Arise. Did I not bid thee arise?
"And who
I demanded.
art thou?"
I am called Shadow in the regions which I inhabit.
Replied the voice mournfully.
I was mortal, but am fiend. I was merciless, but am pitiful. Thou dost feel that I shudder. My teeth chatter as I speak, yet it is not with the chillness of the night without end. But this hideousness is insufferable. How canst thou tranquilly sleep? I cannot rest for the cry of these great agonies. These sights are more than I can bear. Get thee up. Come with me into the outer night, and let me unfold to thee the graves. Is this not the spectacle of woe? Behold.
Oh,
You want to keep narrating? You can if you want.
I looked, and the unseen figure, which still grasped me by the wrist, had caused to be thrown open the graves of all of mankind, and from each issued the faint phosphoric radiance of decay, so that I could see into the innermost recesses, and there view the shrouded bodies in their sad and solemn slumbers with the worm. But alas, the real sleepers were few, by many millions, than those who slumbered not at all, and there was a feeble struggling, and there was a general sad unrest, and from out the depths of the countless pits there came a melancholy rustling from the garments of the buried. And of those who seemed tranquilly to repose, I saw that a vast number had changed, in a greater or less degree, the rigid and uneasy position in which they had originally been entombed. And the voice again said to me as I gazed,
Is it not a pitiful sight?
But before I could find words to reply, the figure had ceased to grasp my wrist. The phosphoric lights expired, and the graves were closed with a sudden violence, while from out them arose a tumult of despairing cries, saying again,
Is it not, O God, is it not a very pitiful sight?
All right. Now we can cycle back. I'll start over again. Fantasies such as these, presenting themselves at night, extended their terrific influence far into my waking hours. My nerves became thoroughly unstrung, and I fell a prey to perpetual horror. I hesitated to ride, or to walk, or to indulge in any exercise that would carry me from home. In fact, I no longer dared trust myself out of the immediate presence of those who were aware of my proneness to catalepsy, lest falling into one of my usual fits, I should be buried before my real condition could be ascertained. I doubted the care, the fidelity of my dearest friends. I dreaded that, in some trance of more than customary duration, they might be prevailed upon to regard me as irrecoverable. I even went so far as to fear that as I occasioned much trouble, that they might be glad to consider any very protracted attack as sufficient excuse for getting rid of me altogether. It was in vain they endeavored to reassure me by the most solemn promises. I exacted the most sacred oaths that under no circumstances they would bury me until decomposition had so materially advanced as to render further preservation impossible. And even then, had the family vault so remodeled as to admit of being readily opened from within, the slightest pressure upon a long
I
lever.
think you skipped one line.
Did
It's-
I?
And even then, my mortal terrors.
And oh, you're right. Sorry. Thank you. And even then, my mortal terrors would listen to no reason, would accept no consolation. I entered into a series of elaborate precautions. Among other things, I had the family vault. Okay, here we go. Among other things, I had the family vault so remodeled as to admit of being readily opened from within. The slightest pressure upon a long lever that extended far into the tomb would cause the iron portals to fly back. There were arrangements also for the free admission of air and light, and convenient receptacles for food and water within immediate reach of the coffin intended for my reception. This coffin was warmly and softly padded, and was provided with a lid fashioned upon the principle of the vault door, with the addition of springs so contrived that the feeblest movement of the body would be sufficient to set it at liberty. Besides all this, there was suspended from the roof of the tomb a large bell, the rope of which, it was designed, should extend through a hole in the coffin, and so be fastened to one of the hands of the corpse. But alas, what avails the vigilance against the destiny of man? Not even these well contrived securities suffice to save from the uttermost agonies of living inhumation a wretch to these agonies foredoomed. There arrived an epoch, as often before there had arrived, in which I found myself emerging from total unconsciousness into the first feeble and indefinite sense of existence. Slowly, with a tortoise gradation, approached a faint gray dawn of the cycle day, a torpid uneasiness, an apathetic endurance of dull pain. No care, no hope, no effort. Then, after a long interval, a ringing in the ears. Then, after a lapse still longer, a prickling or tingling sensation in the extremities. Then, a seemingly eternal period of pleasurable acquiescence, during which awakening feelings are struggling into thought. Then, a brief resinking into nonentity. Then, a sudden recovery. At length, the slight quivering of an awake sorry, of an eyelid, and immediately thereupon an electric shock of a terror, deadly and indefinite, which sends the blood in torrents from the temples to the heart. And now the first positive effort to think, and now the first endeavor to remember, and now a partial and evanescent success. And now the memory has so far regained its dominion that, in some measure, I am cognizant of my state. I feel that I am not awaking from ordinary sleep. I recollect that I have been subject to catalepsy, And now, at last, as if by the rush of an ocean, my shuddering spirit is overwhelmed by the one grim danger, by the one spectral and an ever prevalent idea. For some minutes after this fancy possessed me, I remained without motion. And why? I could not summon courage to move. I dared not make the effort which was to satisfy me of my fate. And yet there was something at my heart which which whispered me it was sure. Despair, such as no other species of wretchedness ever calls into being. Despair alone urged me, after long irresolution, to uplift the heavy lids of my eyes. I uplifted them. It was dark, all dark. I knew that the fit was over. I knew that the crisis of my disorder had long passed. I knew that I had now fully recovered the use of my visual faculties. And yet it was dark, all dark, the intense and utter raylessness of the night that endureth for evermore. Here you go, Suzanne. You can keep going.
I endeavored to shriek, and my lips and my parched tongue moved convulsively together in the attempt, but no voice issued from the cavernous lungs, which, oppressed as if by the weight of some incumbent mountain, gasped and palpitated with the heart at every elaborate and struggling inspiration. The movement of the jaws in this effort to cry aloud showed me that they were bound up, as is usual with the dead. I felt, too, that I lay upon some hard substance, and by something similar, my sides were also closely compressed. So far, I had not ventured to stir any of my limbs, but now I violently threw up my arms, which had been lying at length, with the wrists crossed. They struck a solid wooden substance, which extended above my person at an elevation of not more than 6 inches from my face. I could no longer doubt that I reposed within a coffin at last. And now, amid all my infinite miseries, came sweetly the cherub hope. For I thought of my precautions. I writhed and made spasmodic exertions to force open the lid. It would not move. I felt my wrist for the bell rope. It was not to be found. And now the comforter fled forever, and a still sterner despair reigned triumphant. For I could not help perceiving the absence of the paddings which I had so carefully prepared. And then, too, there came suddenly to my nostrils the strong, peculiar odor of moist earth. The conclusion was irresistible. I was not within the vault. I had fallen into a trance while absent from home, while among strangers. When or how, I could not remember. And it was they who had buried me as a dog, nailed up in some common coffin and thrust deep, deep, and forever into some ordinary and nameless grave. As this awful conviction forced itself thus into the innermost chambers of my soul, I once again struggled to cry aloud. And in this second endeavor, I succeeded. A long, wild, and continuous shriek or yell of agony resounded through the realms of the subterranean night.
All right. Robert, you can take over as the narrator. I will be the gruff voice, and I'm going to put everybody up here. Ashley, you'll be the second voice. Sam, you'll be the third, and you'll be the fourth. Hello there. Sorry, that was like Midwestern. That wasn't gruff, but we'll go with it. Sorry, go ahead, Robert.
Said a gruff voice in reply.
What the devil's the matter now?
Said a second.
Get out of that.
Said a third.
What do you mean by yowling in that air kind of style? Like a catamount?
Said a fourth. And hereupon I was seized and shaken without ceremony for several minutes by a junto of very rough-looking individuals, They did not arouse me from my slumber, for I was wide awake when I screamed, but they restored me to the full possession of my memory. This adventure occurred near Richmond, in Virginia. Accompanied by a friend, I had proceeded upon a gunning expedition, some miles down the banks of the James River. Night approached, and we were overtaken by a storm. The cabin of a small sloop, lying at anchor in the stream and laden with garden mold, afforded us the only available shelter. We made the best of it, and passed the night on board. I slept in one of the only 2 berths in the vessel, and the berths of a sloop of 60 or 70 tons need scarcely be described.
Mhm.
That which I occupied had no bedding of any kind. Its extreme width was 18 inches. The distance of its bottom from the deck overhead was precisely the same. I found it a matter of exceeding difficulty to squeeze myself in. Nevertheless, I slept soundly, and the whole of my vision, for it was no dream and no nightmare, arose naturally from the circumstances of my position, from my ordinary bias of thought, and from the difficulty to which I have alluded of collecting my senses, and especially of regaining my memory, for a long time after awaking from slumber. The men who shook me were the crew of the sloop, and some laborers engaged to unload it. From the load itself came the earthly smell. The bandage about the jaws was a silk handkerchief in which I had bound up my head in default of my customary nightcap. The tortures endured, however, were indubitably quite equal, for the time, to those of actual sepulture. They were inconceivably hideous. But out of evil proceeded good, for their very excess wrought in my spirit an inevitable revulsion. My soul acquired tone, acquired temper. I went abroad. I took vigorous exercise. I breathed the free air of heaven. I thought upon other subjects than death. I discarded my medical books. Buchan I burned. I read no night thoughts, no fustian about churchyards, no bugaboo tales such as this. In short, I became a new man, and lived a man's life. From that memorable night, I dismissed forever my charnel apprehensions, and with them vanquished the cataleptic disorder of which, perhaps, they had been less the consequence than the cause. There are moments when, even to the sober eye of reason, the world of our sad humanity may assume the semblance of a hell. But the intellect of man is no Carathis, to explore with impunity its every cavern. Alas, the grim legion of sepulchral terrors cannot be regarded as altogether fanciful, but like the demons in whose company Afrasiab made his voyage down the Oxus, they must sleep, or they will devour us. They must be suffered to slumber, or we perish.
Wow. That was great. That was something. All right.
There's one thing I have
Yeah.
the note on the references from the last paragraph.
Go for it. Yeah, go for it. And then we have to end because Diane's doing her thing. But yes, please. What are the notes?
Carathis is a moth.
A moth.
It's a species of moth. Afrasiab is it's a Persian reference. It's the name of a mythical king. Is the antagonist of the Persian epic Shahnameh, which is written by a guy named Ferdowsi, and it's like, I think it's like 50,000 lines long or something like that. It's an extremely long epic poem, Iranian epic poem, and Oxus it's a major river in Central Asia which flows through Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. It's now known as the Amu Darya, but it's historically referred to as the Oxus.
Thank you. Well, All right. I have to sadly end the discussion here just because Diane Sayre is doing a very important town hall tonight. So I will end the live stream. But I highly recommend that all of you who are watching online go to the TLO YouTube channel and check that out. So
Jose, I think like one thing that we can end on, I sent it in the chat. I think it's relevant. But it's a Goya painting.
yeah, do you want to explain why you want to bring this up?
Well, I think the name is pretty self-explanatory, and since I think the imagery also is relevant to what we just read of this guy being in this. It seems like he was in some type of slumber, but it wasn't dead, but he was in the state of slumber, but not yet really alive, but also clouded by this darkness. And there was a quality of awakeness that he had to achieve to get out of that state of slumber and somewhat half deaf, half alive. And yeah, I think that this kind of illustrated that. I think it's better for people to.
The title is El sueño de la razón produce monstruos, or The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters. So that is a good thing to end on. Well, not falling asleep of reason, but the capriccio itself. So thank you, Ashley, for that. So I'm going to end the stream. I want to thank everybody for you guys can stay on, but everyone else, see you next week.